My name is Barbara, and I want to share my life story, how it started so beautifully and then changed in ways I never expected. I was married to David, a laid-back man who inherited a small French restaurant from his father. We moved into a cozy house that my grandmother left me. It was there that we started our family and welcomed our son, Richard. In the early years, David and I would sit on our back porch in the evenings after Richard was asleep. We talked about our future, saving for a bigger house, maybe having another child. David always pictured it with a beer in his hand, while I dreamed of giving Richard the best education possible, hoping he could go to college without struggling with student loans like I did. Life was simple and happy. But over time, things changed. I moved forward in my career, but David seemed content with keeping the restaurant the same. It stayed small and cozy, but wasn't making enough money. One evening, while cleaning up after dinner, I brought it up. David, have you thought about adding new items to the menu or making some changes to attract more customers? David, scrubbing a plate a little too hard, replied, "Why fix what isn't broken? We're doing fine." "But we could be doing so much better," I said, drying my hands on a towel. David slammed the plate down, clearly frustrated. "Why are you always pushing? Can't you just be happy with what we have? I'm tired of you always wanting more." I dropped the conversation, but the problem wasn't just the restaurant. As I became an orthodontist, things got worse. David spent more time at the restaurant, not really working, just avoiding home. More and more, he would go to his mother Rachel's house instead. One night, after he spent yet another evening there, I confronted him. "You ran off to your mom's again last night, David. When you're there, who do you think takes care of everything here?" I asked him, but he just rolled his eyes and tossed his keys on the table. "Oh, come on. Mom understands me. She doesn't nag me about money or working more," he said. That hurt, especially since I had been covering his expenses, even sending $1,000 a month to Rachel to help her out. It was getting harder and harder to pay all our bills. Later that week, I called Rachel to talk about our money problems and how David needed to do more. "Rachel, I'm doing everything I can, but David has to step up. We're struggling," I explained. Instead of understanding, Rachel got defensive. "Barbara, you're his wife. It's your job to support him, not push him around. You're always after my boy to change. Can't you see? You're the problem," she accused. Anger boiled inside me. "I am supporting him, Rachel, more than you know. I even send you money every month. How can you say I'm the problem? You think I'm a gold digger? I'm the one counting every penny just to keep us going." I shot back, her words stinging. She hung up without another word. That night, I sat alone, thinking about our conversation. Frustration and sadness filled me. I watched David slump onto the sofa, beer in hand, eyes glued to his phone. Meanwhile, I tucked Richard into bed, my heart heavy from everything weighing on me. Life at home had only gotten harder since David's restaurant started failing. He had to let his employees go, one by one, until he was the only one left, just him, making pizzas in a quiet part of town. Even then, the business kept sinking until he couldn't even keep the lights on. The day he closed the restaurant for good, he came home looking broken. But there was something else in his eyes, defiance. "This isn't the end. It's just a setback," he said, trying to stay strong as he hung up his apron for the last time. I sat at the kitchen table, bills scattered everywhere like a mess I couldn't ignore. "A setback? David, the restaurant is closed. We need money, and we need it now," I said. His pride was hurt, and he tensed up. "I'll find something, but I won't take just any job. I have my standards. I was a business owner," he said. I let out a frustrated sigh. "And what does that mean now, David? We don't need standards. We need money." He shook his head. "I'm not going to be some desk jockey. I have a degree, Barbara. I'm aiming for a managerial position. Nothing less." I stared at him in disbelief. "Your business just failed, and you think you can walk into a high-paying job just like that?" I snapped. He didn't answer. Instead, he stormed out, probably heading to his mother's house. That's what he did now. Whenever things got tough, he disappeared. The weekend didn't bring any relief. Instead, his mother, Rachel, barged in with her usual demands. She arrived just as I was making lunch, her timing as perfect as her nerve. "Barbara, you need to talk to your bosses. Get David a good job at your company. He deserves it," she said, like it was the easiest thing in the world. I let out a short, sharp laugh. "Rachel, that's not how it works. I started at the bottom and worked my way up. They don't just hand out top jobs because I ask," I said. She narrowed her eyes. "You just don't want him to succeed. Afraid he might overshadow you." "Huh," she accused. I took a deep breath, keeping my voice calm despite my frustration. "Seriously, Rachel? David can't just walk into a senior job with no experience." "It's not about fear, it's about reality." Lunch was tense after that. David stayed silent, probably stewing over his bruised ego and his mother's words. As the days passed, nothing changed. David spent his time on the couch, a beer in one hand and his phone in the other, while I worked, took care of the house, and looked after Richard, all on my own. I came home to a messy house and no dinner. "David, could you at least start dinner?" "I'm exhausted," I said, dropping my bags and kicking off my shoes. He grunted, eyes glued to his phone. "You do it better." "I'm tired too, you know." It made me so angry to see him just sitting there while Richard, hungry and waiting, tugged at my sleeve. "David, did you pick him up from school today?" I asked one evening, already knowing the answer. He barely mumbled a response over the sound of the TV. Thankfully, my mom, who lived nearby, had stepped in to help since David had started neglecting even the basics. "David, he's your son too. He needs you," I said, trying to keep my voice calm, though it was getting harder. This was usually the moment when he'd storm out, slamming the door behind him. And just like always, he disappeared, leaving me to handle everything alone. Then things got worse. I noticed money missing from my wallet. At first, it was just a few dollars. But soon, entire bills were gone. One night, after checking again and finding more money missing, I confronted him. "David, have you been taking money from my purse?" His eyes shifted away before meeting mine again. "I needed some cash for beer," he admitted. "Beer? You're just taking money now?" "Like a thief," I exclaimed. "How dare you call me a thief?" "I'm your husband," he shot back, his voice rising. Before we could argue more, Rachel burst in. It seemed she had overheard us. Her face was full of anger. "Barbara, all you care about is money. Can't you see he's struggling? You should be supporting him, not accusing him. Support him by letting him steal from me? What about Richard? What about our bills?" I fired back, my voice getting louder, all the stress from the past months boiling over. David just sank back onto the couch, staring blankly at nothing while Rachel and I argued over him. In the end, she stormed out, and he said nothing. Then, as summer ended, Richard got sick. His fever spiked one night, and no amount of soothing or cool cloths seemed to help. I sat beside his bed, thermometer in hand, feeling completely alone. My heart sank with every beep of the thermometer. Richard's fever wasn't going down. As usual, David was no help, glued to his phone on the couch. "David, can you check if we have any more fever medicine?" I asked, trying to stay calm. He grunted and slowly got up, but I knew it would be faster to do it myself. Richard whimpered softly, clutching my hand. Every second mattered. I kissed his forehead quickly and rushed to the kitchen. The next morning, the doctor said Richard needed medicine and tests. "It's better to be safe," he advised, writing down his recommendations. Tests meant more expenses, more than we had left after bills and David's careless spending. My heart pounded as I made the decision. I transferred the last of our savings for Richard's treatment, including the $1,000 I usually sent to Rachel. There was no other choice. Not long after, Rachel stormed in, furious. "Barbara, where's my money?" "It's the first of the month," she demanded. I was packing Richard's small backpack, getting him ready for another doctor's visit. I braced myself for another fight. "Rachel, I had to use the money for Richard. He's very sick. He needs tests and treatment." Rachel's face hardened, her lips pressing into a thin line. "Do you really expect me to believe you have no other money?" That was my money, Barbara. I need it, she snapped. I stepped back, raising my hands as my motherly instincts kicked in. Richard is my priority. He's just a child, Rachel. He's sick, and I have to take care of him. Rachel's eyes flashed with anger. I knew you'd do something like this. Holding back my money for that boy, she spat, her words full of venom. That boy? Rachel, that's your grandson. How can you be so heartless? I shot back, my patience running out. I don't need a lecture from you, Barbara. Just make sure I get my money by tomorrow, or you'll regret it, she hissed, her face twisted with anger. Her threat hung in the air, but I refused to back down. I glanced at Richard, weak and fragile in the next room, and it only strengthened my resolve. Get out of my house, Rachel. I won't tolerate threats. Not today, not ever. She looked ready to argue, but something in my eyes stopped her. Instead, she stormed out, slamming the door behind her. A heavy silence followed. Then, without a word, David slipped out after her. I went back to Richard, my hands shaking as I gently stroked his hair. He looked up at me with tired, pain-filled eyes. It's okay, baby. Mommy's here, I whispered, kissing his forehead. My determination grew stronger. The days blurred into endless hospital visits and sleepless nights. David's absence was almost a relief. No more fights, no more cold looks. But after a week of quiet, I felt something was wrong. One Saturday afternoon, I checked my bank app. My heart dropped. Huge withdrawals had nearly emptied our savings. Panic filled me as I scrolled through the transaction history. Every withdrawal felt like a betrayal. I called David again and again, but he didn't answer. He hadn't picked up in days. Realizing what he had done, I blocked the card immediately to stop him from taking any more money. In that moment, I finally saw the full depth of David's selfishness. A week after he vanished, David came back. But he wasn't alone. Rachel was right beside him. They found me sitting on the living room floor, surrounded by Richard's toys and stacks of unpaid medical bills. Barbara, we have news, David said, smirking. I won the lottery, $200 million. And no, you won't see a cent of it. I'm filing for divorce. The room spun. What about Richard? I managed to whisper. Rachel let out a cold, mocking laugh. Oh, Barbara, always playing the martyr, she sneered. You underestimated my son. Now he's rich, and you're nothing. He'll find someone better. Someone younger. David nodded, grabbing a duffel bag from the floor. Yeah, I'm moving in with Mom. You'll manage on your own, won't you? He said with a smirk. Rachel smirked too, wrapping her arm around him. Let's leave the gold digger to drown in her mess. We have better places to be, she said smugly as they walked out the door. The door slammed behind them. Betrayal. Abandonment. Theft. David had walked away, leaving me behind with nothing but heartbreak and a mountain of problems. But as the shock faded, something else rose inside me. Determination. They thought they could break me. Leave me with nothing. I wouldn't let that happen. With steady hands, I picked up my phone and called my lawyer. David had used our shared money to buy that lottery ticket, and I was going to fight for what was rightfully mine. I want to contest the winnings, I told my lawyer. He was cautious, but supportive. It's going to be a tough fight, Barbara, but we'll give it everything we've got, he assured me. As I hung up the phone, the weight of the battle ahead settled on my shoulders. But this time, I felt stronger. The betrayal had changed me. I wasn't just fighting to survive, I was fighting for justice. For myself. For Richard. As the court date got closer, my lawyer, Mr. Paul, and I worked non-stop. We gathered every piece of evidence, bank statements, financial records, anything that showed I had been the one supporting our home while David contributed nothing. Barbara, we have a solid case. The strongest point is that he used your bank card to buy the ticket, Mr. Paul reassured me as we sat in his office, surrounded by stacks of paperwork. With the hearing just days away, the tension in my life was constant. Then, only 5 days before court, David and Rachel showed up unexpectedly. I was in the kitchen while Richard played at my feet when I heard a car door slam. Moments later, they burst through the front door, their faces red with anger. "You're really going through with this? Suing your own husband?" David shouted, his voice echoing through the small room. Rachel jumped in right after, her tone sharp and bitter. "Greedy? That's what you are. Trying to take money that isn't yours." I stood my ground, feeling Richard press against my leg for comfort. "It's not just David's money. He used our joint account, money that I provided because he wasn't contributing," I said calmly. Their anger only fueled my determination. David's face twisted with disgust. "It's not about control, David. It's about fairness," I continued. "You left, remember? You and your mother mocked me, said I'd be left with nothing." They kept shouting, but I refused to let it turn into a full-blown fight in front of Richard. "You need to leave. Now," I said firmly. "We'll settle this in court." They stormed out, slamming the door behind them. And just like that, the house felt lighter. Cleaner. I held Richard close, whispering to him that everything would be okay. The courtroom was tense. David sat across from me, his lawyer whispering in his ear, while Rachel glared at me with pure hatred. When Mr. Paul presented the bank statements and financial records, the truth was undeniable. Every time David's lawyer struggled to answer a question, I felt a wave of victory. The judge listened carefully, his eyes locked on David as the evidence unfolded. The key argument was clear. The lottery ticket was bought with money from our joint account, which made it a marital asset. As Mr. Paul explained this, David suddenly raised his voice. "I was the one who bought the ticket. It was my decision. My luck," he argued. But the judge quickly responded, his tone firm. "Not your money, Mr. Jeffrey. And unfortunately for you, luck does not override the law." After a long deliberation, the judge gave his ruling. "It is clear from the evidence that Mr. Jeffrey was financially dependent on Mrs. Jeffrey when the lottery ticket was purchased. Therefore, the ticket is a marital asset," he announced. David was awarded only 1/4 of the winnings. The rest, 3/4, was awarded to me. David and Rachel sat frozen, their faces full of shock. They hadn't expected this. Months later, after the divorce was finalized and the chaos had settled, I finally began to focus on the future. I had heard too many stories about lottery winners losing everything, so I decided to be smart. I reached out to Thomas, an old college friend who had built a career in finance, and asked for his advice. Over coffee, we discussed smart investments in technology and renewable energy. I also made sure to set aside enough money for Richard's education. His future was my top priority. Thomas's guidance was invaluable. Meanwhile, David and Rachel had a very different approach to their share of the money. They quickly became the talk of the town. David showed off his new sports car, while Rachel flaunted expensive jewelry and designer clothes, enjoying her new lifestyle. One afternoon, as I picked up Richard from school, a friend eagerly shared the latest gossip about David's wild spending and Rachel's lavish shopping sprees. I simply smiled, holding Richard's hand. I had chosen security. They had chosen excess. And I had no doubt who would come out ahead in the end. I simply smiled and turned my attention back to Richard and our future. At home, I carefully planned our finances with Thomas's help. Every investment decision brought us closer to stability and security, ensuring that Richard would have every opportunity in life. Richard often asked about college, his eyes bright with dreams and possibilities. Seeing his excitement only strengthened my determination to give him the best future possible. Life had finally settled into a peaceful routine. Richard was thriving in school, and our investments were growing. The past felt like a distant memory. But life has a way of bringing things back when we least expect it. One afternoon, while having coffee with a close friend, I received some surprising news. "David's hit rock bottom," she said. "He lost his car, his money, and he's drowning in gambling debts. Things got so bad that he even got into a fight and hurt his neck." I hid my shock behind my coffee cup. "Really? That's unfortunate," I said simply. "And Rachel?" I asked. "She's selling her jewelry. She and David are desperate now. After years of showing off their wealth, they have nothing left." I listened, shaking my head at how quickly things had changed. Not long after, there was a knock at my door. I opened it to find David standing there, a shadow of the man he once was. The fancy clothes were gone, replaced by faded jeans and a worn-out jacket. His once proud eyes now looked tired and desperate. "Barbara, can we talk?" His voice was hoarse, as if he had practiced this moment over and over. I hesitated but finally stepped aside, letting him in. Richard was out with his friends, so it was just the two of us. I didn't plan on letting this visit last long. As David walked in, he took a slow, lingering look around the living room. "I've lost everything, Barbara," he admitted. "The money, the car. I have nothing left. And I miss my family. I miss you." I raised an eyebrow. "You miss the money. That's what you miss," I replied. "No, it's more than that," he insisted. "I've been thinking a lot. I was hoping maybe we could start over." His eyes were full of pleading, but all I could think about were the years of lies, neglect, and betrayal. I let out a small, disbelieving scoff. "Start over? After everything you put us through? You left, called me greedy, wasted all your money, and now you want to come back like nothing happened?" He looked away, his discomfort clear. "I know I made terrible mistakes, Barbara," he said quietly. But this time, I wasn't about to let his words fool me. "I really understand now, and I'm ready to change," David insisted. I shook my head. "David, you left when you thought you were better off without us. That showed me who you really are. Now, you're only sorry because you have nothing left," I said firmly. He sighed, letting my words sink in. "So, there's no chance for us?" he asked quietly. "David, I forgave you a long time ago for my peace, not so you could walk back into our lives when things went wrong for you. Richard and I are doing great, and I plan to keep it that way," I said. With a heavy heart, I watched as he turned and walked away, his shoulders slumped. As he disappeared down the street, I felt something shift inside me. A chapter of my life had finally closed. Later that day, I picked up Richard from school. His laughter filled the car, warm and bright, reminding me of the real riches in my life. No lottery win could ever compare to the love, joy, and peace we had built. Our journey hadn't been easy, but it was ours, filled with moments that were truly priceless.